Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome back to Doctor Who Literature. My name is Jason. We're a member of the Direction Point Doctor Who podcast network. We are back once again in the William Hartnell era, a novelization of the very first pseudo-historical Doctor Who story, talking of course about the Time Meddler. I never get tired of talking about the William Hartnell years, and I'm happy to announce that after the Time Meddler, we still will have several more opportunities to do so. My guest this week is the great Frazer Gregory, who you've heard on this show several times before. Usually Frazer is on to discuss stories that are not quite so beloved in Doctor Who fandom. We have had some memorable discussions about some less remembered corners of the Doctor Who universe, like Time Flight, or The Creature from the Pit, or, well, that second Doctor Who story with the Quarks. The title of it escapes me. But this time, it's a story that we both greatly enjoy, The Time Meddler, and during the course of our recording, we made a very interesting discovery about when this story takes place, relative to the month and day on which Frazer and I were having our conversation. I will be out of town the next 2 weekends after this one. I don't expect that is going to do too much to alter the Doctor Who literature schedule. I have already recorded and finished one of the 2 episodes that'll be released on the Sunday when I'm out of town. There is a slight chance that I might drop in a Doctor Who Lit Presents episode in the event that I'm not able to get the other interview recorded in time for my going away, but that would be at worst a 1-week detour to our general weekly release schedule. We have a little more than 30 books left to go, which means that we have about 9 months left to go on this podcast if I do not cover any of the 21st century target novelizations. Once again, if you have any ideas for the final 30 or so episodes of the show, I invite you to drop me a line at Doctor Who Literature, that's drwholiterature@gmail.com. One of your last opportunities, perhaps, to influence the direction of this show, or let me know what you think. It has been a blast as we approach the 3rd anniversary of Doctor Who Literature, and I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with myself when I don't have a target to read every week after the show runs its course. But, of course, that is the future, and those of you who have seen The Time Meddler or read The Time Meddler know this is very much a story about the past. So, let's get to it.
Hi, I'm Rupert Booth.
I am known as Paul Ferry.
And my name is Barry Williams.
Together, we host Time Ram.
Time Ram's a cruel mistress.
It's a random number generator.
That also.
We roll a number from 1 to 13, and that's our doctor. Then 1 to 300 for the story, and then we ram them together.
Even if it doesn't make sense.
Cruel, I tell you.
Time Ram, putting the wrong doctors in the wrong stories, so you don't have to.
You're listening to Doctor Who Literature.
So my guest this morning on Doctor Who Literature is a frequent guest to the show, but who has not been on in some time. And his Skype username is Professor Frazeroff, although I would point out to you that my Underwater Menace episode is still a few weeks in the future. This is not the Underwater Menace. We are here to talk about the Time Meddler, so I would expect your username to be the Time Frazer.
Well, yes, a hail and hearty Northumbrian welcome to everyone this morning. I'd normally change my username to something a bit more appropriate, but as I was sitting down to log on to the computer to start the recording, my wife pointed out that directly above where I was sitting was Shelob, the spider from Lord of the Rings, in full size. So I had to frantically deal with that, and so I'm not quite as prepared at the minute as I would like to be, but we'll be fine.
The historic Shelob, if you take the Lord of the Rings as canon, was about 6 feet across, and her spider web, rather than made of silk, was basically the strength of steel, and once you were stuck in it, there was no getting out. Hopefully you did not have quite as grisly a fate as Shelob's previous victims.
No, but I think the Lord of the Rings one, now you've given us the dimensions, was a little bit smaller than the one above me.
Just proof of J.R.R. Tolkien's creativity. Shelob translates to girl spider.
Well, it works.
So let's talk about you before we talk about this week's book and TV episode, 1965's The Time Meddler, because you have not been on this show in a while, and I have not been on too many Trap Ones this year. So what have you been up to in the podcast sphere in 2024 since you and I last got together to discuss the most recent book before this one?
I think I've been Trap Oneing a little bit. I've had a few invites on there, so I think the last time I was on there with a proper episode was the 15th novel Caged by Una McCormack, which I discussed with Mark and Hannah and Lucy. So the most recent thing I've done, which we did cover on Trap One, was go to the BFI for the Happiness Patrol screening, which was the screening that is preceding the season 25 Blu-ray collection box set. So that was a really good day out, good chance to catch up with a lot of the Trap One team in person, and see my favourite Doctor Who story ever on the big screen.
I was at the BFI in June to meet up with Conrad, but there was no actual Doctor Who screening that day, so I have not been there for the really big show. But my understanding from Mark is that when they sent the video of Happiness Patrol to screen, they sent the wrong video. So instead of the new special effects, you got the basic original 1988 version. Yes,
it started off. We were expecting the new expanded and improved version. So it started off, and I was kind of sitting going, "Oh, well, I like what they've done with the soundtrack here, because you can really pick up on the music in the background." So I think Mark Ayres has done a fantastic job, with the soundtrack, and I got a couple of minutes in and just paused, and Justin, the host, came out and said, "Yeah, they've sent the wrong one. It's the broadcast version." So I was like, "Oh, okay, I'm noticing something new on this." So yeah, had to play the just the normal broadcast version in the end, which it would have been nice to get to see the special edition, but ultimately, it's an effort for me to get to the BFI from Newcastle. So it was a story that I was willing to make that effort, that time and money, put the time and money into going down. And I did that on the basis that it was just going to be the Happiness Patrol, not the special edition. So I wasn't too disappointed. But I think Pete McTighe was there, and he'd started the Q&A by explaining what had gone into the special edition. So for him to be there and not to be able to show off exactly what he's done with that was sad for him. So it would be nice to see that. But no, it was a lovely day out. Like I got to meet Conrad and Pete and Si and Mark was there. So we had a good day out at the BFI. I'd love to do it again, but like I say, time and money, might not be able to.
Yeah, Mark was traveling from probably just about as far as you were. I had a similar experience in 2018 when Fathom Events, which does the big synchronized broadcast in movie theaters of particular movies or live events or specials, screened The Woman Who Fell to Earth, Jodie Whittaker's debut Doctor Who story. It was a few days after the episode released on the Sunday night BBC. It would have been a midweek airing. So I went to the now sadly defunct Court Street movie theater in downtown Brooklyn. Great place to see a movie. Tons of audience participation. The worse the movie, the better the crowd was.
Yeah.
But it was mostly a 3/4 empty theater to watch Jodie Whittaker's debut. And they start the live stream, and it was Tom Baker. And I'm like, wow, it's very nice of Tom Baker to come out of retirement and do a special introduction for Jodie Whittaker's debut story. A great way of passing the torch. But instead of talking about Jodie, he was talking about himself and 1974. And it turns out he was talking about the special edited cut-down version of Genesis of the Daleks, which had recently come out on what was then the season 12 Blu-ray. And they had also broadcast the wrong tape from 6 months earlier. But in that case, Fathom was able to turn off Revenge of the Cybermen somewhere in the middle of the episode 2 material and show us, well, the 20 of us who were there, The Woman Who Fell to Earth. So I was able to see Woman Who Fell to Earth. Fathom was able to do a much faster turnaround.
Yeah.
My understanding is BFI is doing a second screening of the Special Happiness Patrol edition. But
yeah,
not on the same day.
I'm not going to be able to make that, unfortunately. But yeah, they have. It's quite a good gesture. They've put another screening on, given anyone who had a ticket for the first one gets a free ticket for the second one, the actual special edition, and then obviously they'll sell what's left over to the general public, which will probably go because it sold out really quick. These events just seem to sell out quicker and quicker now.
While we were talking, I had my intern go into the tape archives, which are in the basement of this building, the second under basement, actually. And my intern went through the tapes, reel to reel, put on the big, oversized headsets, and was listening to the reel to reel recordings. And he's had a courier send up a note here, and let's see. This is your 8th appearance on Doctor Who literature,
wow,
which is not a bad showing for episode 125. And your last appearance before this was a joint appearance for episode 100, The Two Doctors, when you appeared along with Conrad and the other Jason Davis. This is your first solo outing since episode 86, The Dominators, which was the best 15-round title fight in the history of Doctor Who literature pugilism.
Yep.
You usually come on the show as the patron saint of lost causes. You have been here to discuss Time Flight. You have been here to discuss the criminally maligned and unfairly rated Creature from the Pit. And you've been here to discuss The Dominators. This is a story, Time Meddler is a story that I have loved since I first saw it in 1985. And the DWM 2014 survey, which I believe is the last time DWM did a front-to-back survey of every Doctor Who story rather than breaking it down by era. At that point, Time Meddler was number 77 out of 241, which is a good showing, top third. I'll get right into the Darren Mooney questions. Now, usually I run into the brick wall of most of my guests not having a mental list of Doctor Who's top 60 stories. So the most common answer when I ask a la Darren Mooney, does the Time Meddler belong on a list of the 60 best Doctor Who stories of the first 60 years? The most common answer is, I don't make lists, which leaves the question sort of hanging there awkwardly. But I know that you personally have actually made a 60 for 60 list because you borrowed the list that I made in 2023 and came up with your own. So I'll ask you about your personal list second. But first, does Time Meddler belong on any list of the greatest 60 Doctor Who stories of the first 60 years? We know for DWM it did not. It was number 77.
No. Yes, I think it will. And unless I'm very much mistaken, it did make your list.
We'll come to that in a moment, but right now we're asking in the platonic sense, does it belong on our list of the top 60?
Yes, I think it will. It kind of sits right at the end of the broadcast season 2, and it's a great story, isn't it? It's William Hartnell at his best. This patch here, the run he goes on from the Romans through to Galaxy 4, if not the Mythmakers. This is peak Hartnell. You've got Vicky, well established now, Maureen O'Brien, playing the companion. You've got Dennis Spooner writing, coming off of the story editing role, being pretty much the only person who is equipped and qualified enough to write a story to finish off this broadcast season. And you've got Peter Purvis coming in as Stephen, so it's just a blend of a lot of different things. You've got an introduction story for your new character. You've got a fantastic new villain coming in the shape of the monk. You've got Dennis Spooner inventing a new subgenre of Doctor Who stories, the pseudo-historical, where it is a historical, but Dennis Spooner's very quickly realised that this isn't the future of the show. Yes, you can do time travel, but you've got to put something a little bit more interesting in. So he brings in the monk and gives us a pseudo historical. It's just got so much going on, and I would quite happily have it on a list of the top 60.
Second question, and I agree with just about all of your points, but we'll come back and revisit that in a moment. Second question, is the Time Meddler on your own top 60 list that you counted down on Twitter in late 2023? I have deleted Twitter. I can no longer access Twitter. I do not remember if Time Meddler was on your top 60 list. So, like my audience, I am eagerly awaiting the answer to this question because I actually don't know it.
It didn't make the list. It didn't make the cut, but it came very close. I remember I did the sort of the half dozen stories that didn't make the top 60, and it didn't come in there. But I think if I'd done another half dozen on top of that, it would have been included. So I think probably about top 70. I knew you were going to ask us this question, and I should have looked it up, but I did my list. The way I did my list was use a preference generator from the Metabulus 2 podcast, and just you've got to pick one or the other. So I just very quickly picked, and out of all 300 odd stories, just skimmed off the top 60. So I can't remember exactly where it came, but I do remember it being very, very close to up there.
And for myself, Time Meddler is basically the last great moment of Doctor Who for William Hartnell. Immediately after this, the production team goes off and makes Galaxy 4 / Mission to the Unknown. Single story production block, same director, similar casts. But the TARDIS team is only around for the first 4 weeks of that Galaxy 4, which is held over as the season 3 broadcast premiere. Then there's hiatus, and then when you come back, it's the Mythmakers, which is a fine story for Hartnell, but is also when Maureen O'Brien finds out that she was fired, definitely against her will. And then immediately after Mythmakers, you come to a long run of stories where William Hartnell begins to be sidelined with John Wiles' intent to fire and replace him, which eventually gets done by Innes Lloyd. Time Meddler is Verity Lambert's last show as sole producer. John Wiles begins trailing her during the making of Time Meddler, and basically is running the show for Galaxy 4 while she's cleaning out her office. Donald Tosh is script editor for the first time, and if you read the DVD production notes for Time Meddler, which everybody should do, this is the beginning of Donald Tosh telling tales out of school about William Hartnell's quote-unquote failing memory and quote-unquote bad attitude. Many of the stories that Donald Tosh tells cannot be verified.
Yep.
And as I've mentioned in several recent season 3 episodes, he probably was a little bit of a fabulist.
Yep.
There is a mention on the Wikipedia page for this story, The Time Meddler, that Hartnell did throw some quote-unquote fake tantrums because he was a little bit unnerved by the change in production team. So he was throwing his weight around while winking to his co-stars that he didn't really mean it. But certainly that did not get him off on the right foot with the new team, and may have been the first in a cascading series of unfortunate events that led to him being replaced. However, that being said, his byplay with Peter Butterworth in episode 4 is about as good as Doctor Who gets for me, similar to the way his byplay with Ivor Salter in The Mythmakers is about as good as Doctor Who gets for me, but at least with Time Meddler we can see it, whereas Mythmakers can only guess. Hartnell was better in historical stories than he was in futuristic sci-fi stories. He was at his best when he was going up head-to-head with a humanoid antagonist played by a Titanic comedy actor that he would have known for the last several decades. And in Peter Butterworth, he gets his foil so much so that to the extent that Butterworth comes back in the following production season to reprise his role as Time Meddler for a 3-episode arc in the middle of Dalek's master plan.
Yep.
Peter Purvis and Maureen O'Brien are one of the best companion teams, and it's a shame that we only have, now with the advent of Galaxy 4 on animation, we have only 2 of their stories. When I was watching this on PBS in 1985-86, the next story, surviving story after this was the Ark, followed by the Gunfighters, followed by the War Machines. And of course, then you have Stephen and Dodo, Ben and Polly. This was the only chance that I would have had as a kid to see Vicky and Stephen together, but they are so good you could swear they were together for more than just the 3 complete serials that they were. They already have that brother-sister dynamic down pat.
Yep.
Now, this would have only been the second week they worked together, and the first week they worked together as solo companions because Ian and Barbara had been present the previous week, episode 6 of The Chase. I think Time Meddler belongs on a list. Number one, it is a delight to watch. At a 4-part story, you can't break out that silly old complaint about it's 2 episodes too long. The cast is great. Some of the Saxons and Vikings maybe are not the best guest actors the show's ever had, but you're getting back Alethea Charlton, who had been so good in the Caveman story. Now that I'm 50 years old, I'm starting to blank out. Unearthly Child / Tribe of Gum / 100,000 BC / The Caveman story. But she more than holds her own. She gets several one-on-one scenes with William Hartnell.
Yeah.
Now, this is sadly her last Doctor Who appearance, and she died very, very young. But there's really nothing bad about this story for me. And then you have that lovely TV season ending bit where you have the solarized images of the cast against the closing credits, which I just watched over and over again as a kid because it's so delightful. And Doctor Who wasn't doing anything like that. And then, of course, it's important as the first pseudo-historical story. And here we are in 2024. Doctor Who is still doing pseudo-historical stories. And you have the Time Meddler to thank for that. And it works so well. Plus, the episode 3 cliffhanger, a TARDIS, the monks got a TARDIS, is one of the most important cliffhangers in Doctor Who history because it's the first time we meet another Time Lord. Not that they're called that yet. So for me, this story kicks on every level. For myself, when I did my top 60 for 60 list, I didn't use the preference generator. I just found it was a little too difficult for me to break down the questions because it's so subjective. What I did is, and I've been through this on Doctor Who literature before, you can fast forward 30 seconds if you've heard this explanation many times. I just went through the entire episode guide and I wrote down the names of the stories that I thought were great. And I wound up with a list of 99 stories. And then I just narrowed it down, rearranged them. And I got my top 60. And then I got a bubbling under list.
Yep.
Bubbling under Hartnell stories were the Aztecs, the Sensorites, the Chase, and the War Machines. War Machines, very important, because again, it reformats the show, and it brings us into the modern era. It's beautifully directed, but it's not the best story, so it didn't quite make top 60. The Chase, for me, is the moment when Doctor Who flexes his muscles and embraces its position as the most popular show on television. And it gives us an epic knockdown, drag-out, big action sequence between the Daleks and Mechanoids to close out that story, plus the Ian and Barbara departure. But it's got a lot of fluffs. It's not the most popular story. It's very funny, but there are better Dalek stories in the Hartnell era, so I had to consign it to second place. Aztecs is very, very good, but there are other historicals in my top 60, so the Massacre is there to speak for the Aztecs. And the Sensorites is a guilty pleasure, but objectively is not one of the best 60 Doctor Who stories ever made. I had Sean Lyon on my 60 for 60 episode in November 2023. I highly recommend folks who are newer to the show go back and listen to that. Sean is the showrunner at Gallifrey 1 in Los Angeles. We both had the Time Meddler on our top 60 list. For me, it ranked number 40. So not a top 10, not a top 20. It's in between the Massacre at 41 and Rebos Operation at 39. I think 40 is a very fair showing, much better than DWM, which had it at 77. But it definitely earns its place for me at number 40. Third question. If a listener has not yet seen the Time Meddler, do you recommend they go on eBay and purchase the 2 entertaining video of Time Meddler, or purchase the amazing Season 2 Blu-ray box set and watch the Time Meddler on their Blu-ray player, and then come back and listen to the rest of the episode?
Definitely the Blu-ray. Go for the Blu-ray because the Blu-ray has got the missing 12 seconds added back in. So you get the bit where the Saxons spoiler alert, viciously murder the marauding Vikings at the end of episode 4. There was a censor cut of 12 seconds because that was too graphic, but the producers of the Blu-ray set have recreated that scene using, stand-ins and body doubles, and refilmed that, put the soundtrack back over the top of it, made it look as if it was a 1966 tape that they've then scaled back up again, and that's great. But obviously you get all the other bonus stuff as well, and you get the rest of season 2. So yeah, go get the Blu-ray basically.
It is, when you're watching Doctor Who on DVD in chronological order, the last audio commentary to which Verity Lambert contributed. And she passed away even before the DVD came out, I believe. So that's very important to have, if just for that reason alone. And for me, same answer. You must see the Time Meddler. Even if you came to Doctor Who with the new series and you don't have the patience to watch the classic series because the pacing is different and the timing is different and the acting is not always as crisp and evocative as 21st century acting, Time Meddler is one of Doctor Who's most important historical documents because it is the reformatting of the show. You don't get the Master. You don't get the Ronnie. You don't get all those Gallifrey stories in the new series without the Time Meddler establishing all that first. Yeah.
And like I say, you don't get the blend of the science fiction and the historical later on. It's I think it's not until the Time Warrior after this, is it, that we get another stab at going back into Earth's history with the show. But this very much kind of shows what you can do is with the format, and say, well, you don't just have to have pure science fiction, you don't just have to have pure historical, you can merge the two together and tell a damn good tale.
Time Warrior was a story that I ranked very highly in the 1990s, and when I made my top 10 list for Records Doctor Who in the mid-90s, I believe Time Warrior was on it. When I watched it as part of my pilgrimage, it dropped in my estimation only because when you watch it immediately after 3 straight seasons of Katie Manning, the John Pertwee, Liz Sladen chemistry is non-existent in Time Warrior, so I had just had crazy Katie Manning hangover, and I couldn't get into it as much as I previously had. So the Time Warrior, and I did my Time Warrior episode before my top 60 list, Time Warrior is no longer in my top 60 and is not in my bubbling under, but there are so many other John Pertwee stories in my top 60. But yeah, you're right, it was a long time before they came back to the pseudo-historical. And for me, again, yeah, you must watch Time Meddler. From a geographic standpoint, you are from the north. How close do you live to where the actual events of the Time Meddler would have taken place?
Well, this is where it gets a bit complicated, because I am in Newcastle upon Tyne, which is in the northeast of England, which is just at the bottom of the county of Northumberland. So my county is actually Tyne and Wear, but just a couple of miles north of me, we have Northumberland, which gains its name from Northumbria, which was the sort of Anglo-Saxon kingdom where the Time Meddler takes place. So I was all prepared to come in here and do a Jim Sangster and give you a complete history of the coast of the northeast of England as it appears in Doctor Who, because lo and behold, we have this story, but also the Curse of Fenric, which is set in Northumberland coast. But when I actually came to look at it, I listened to last week's episode and realised that there's no possible way I can ever match Jim Sangster, so I'm not going to try. And secondly, coming into this it's a little bit more vague as to where the action actually takes place, because Northumbria was a massive kingdom in England. It stretched from very far into Scotland as we know it now. It included Edinburgh as part of Northumbria, and all the way down to sort of York at the time. So over the following years, it gradually shrank down. The Kingdom of Scotland was established at Berwick, and that was the northern border of Northumbria, and then you still kept sort of York as the southern sort of border. So in terms of where does this take place, you've got to kind of look at the clues, because it's very vague. It is just we're in Northumbria somewhere. So you've got to think as to look at the clues and look at the history, because what this story, the story is written and the book expands on, is it's very educational. When you watched this in 1986, was it? How familiar were you with what happens in England in 1066?
The only reason that I was familiar with it, it was not taught as part of our main history courses when I was in elementary school, which at that point was kindergarten through 6th grade, for me ages 4 through 11. But I knew about it because I knew the Battle of Hastings was October 15th, which happens to be my birthday. So I knew the vague outlines of it, but I did not have a full 45-minute long history lecture about the Battle of Hastings and the Norman Conquest in my education until much, much further on. I have gone on Google Maps because I read Dracula for the first time at around the same age, 1985. You are actually northwest of Whitby, which is on the coast. Whitby is where Dracula comes ashore in the Bram Stoker novel. And I will point out that when I was at the Museum of Irish Literature in Dublin 2 weeks ago, Bram Stoker being Irish, I actually saw a first edition hardcover of Dracula under glass. Nice. I read Dracula last year, and it does not hold up because it is so virulently xenophobic, if not anti-Semitic. So Dracula the novel, which I have loved in the past, does not hold up for me on modern reading. But it is made clear by the Reverend Wainwright in Curse of Fenric that the military base near where his church is where Dracula came ashore in the novel. So that would be near Whitby. And that is actually south of you, according to Google Maps.
It is, yes. So that would be Yorkshire. Whitby's classed as Yorkshire. So the way the counties go, if you look at your map on Google Maps and you follow that coast down, if you start up with the Scottish border, that's Northumberland. You then come down to where Newcastle is, the River Tyne gives you Tyne and Weir, where Sunderland is. You have County Durham south of that, which then goes to Teesside and then to Yorkshire. So Whitby, Scarborough is Yorkshire, but that's probably whereabouts this story set, because like I said, as I was a kid, the Battle of Hastings 1066, it's taught in primary schools. Everyone knows the story. Harold gets an arrow in the eye. William conquers because he's William the Conqueror, and the Normans then take over the country. But you don't get so much as the preceding events, which this book really gives us. The fact that one of the reasons why Harold Godwinson lost the Battle of Hastings is because he'd marched in his troops all the way from London up to York to defeat Harold Hardrada, and had to march them back down again to then fight William the Conqueror in October. So when you look at it, it's the historical facts is that Harold Hardrada landed in the Humber estuary, which is where which we know this from the book. The Doctor is trying to console Edith and saying, yes, the Vikings are coming, but don't worry, they will land south of you. They will land in the Humber. So it's not around Eds. They're a bit further northern up, but how further north? You've got to think the monk's plan is to sort of spot the invading ships, light some beacons, divert them towards his monastery on the cliff, and use his atomic cannon to blast them. So they can't be that far away from Humber. So they can't be that far away from York. It's only slightly more northern. So it will still class as Northumbria, but will it class as the northeast as I know it now? Possibly not. It's probably going to be more around Whitby and Scarborough in Yorkshire, I would have said.
And York, the city, of course, is quite a bit southwest of Whitby on the map, about as far again as Newcastle upon Tyne is from Whitby. And looking also at the map, I see that Carlisle, where Mark from Trap 1 is due west of you, pretty much on the same latitude. Although the
Yeah.
Scottish border zigzags, so you were actually much further south from Scotland than Mark is.
Yeah, so Carlisle's on the west coast, we're on the east coast, so sort of like the neck of England. He's on one side, I'm on the other.
My recent UK tour took me to England, Wales, Republic of Ireland, and Northern Ireland, but not to Scotland. I have not yet been to Scotland. That is my next big bucket list item.
Yes, you'll have to go to Scotland. It's a beautiful place. People are fantastic, and it's a place that we go often and really enjoy going. The interesting thing with doing that sort of digging around and thinking, oh well, actually, where was this story actually set, is picking backwards as to when it's actually set, because you said yourself that the Battle of Hastings was October the 15th. We know, like I said, the fleet, Harold Hardrada's fleet, landed at the Humber estuary, travelled up the River Ouse and fought, took the city of York. So the battle where, they landed and took York on the 20th of September. They were defeated because Harold really marched his troops and didn't stop and got up from London to York in 4 days flat. And the Battle of Stamford Bridge, which is the event that the monk is trying to avoid, takes place on the 25th of September. So, 25th of September is Battle of Stamford Bridge. 20th of September is when Harold and his troops take York. Moving backwards then, if you think, when did they actually land at the Humber? Probably few days before that. So you're talking maybe about the 15th of September. So in this story, the monk has spotted the sort of scouting party, thinking the ships are 2 or 3 days out from being visible for him to launch his plan. So if we're given the benefit of the doubt, if we say 5 days before they arrive at our predisposed time of 15th of September, 5 days before that would be the 10th of September.
And Nigel Robinson in the novelization
what date are we recording this, Jason?
Interesting. We are recording this on September 10th.
Yes. So that struck me as a little bit of a happy accident. I think we are probably recording this and releasing this pretty much when it's actually set.
So we are recording this on Time Meddler Day.
Yeah.
Which is a much happier anniversary for me than what tomorrow is, but that's a story for a different podcast entirely.
Absolutely.
I was going to say Nigel Robinson in the novelization goes much more deep into the realism of what the story would have been. And in the scene that I read last night, when the doctor is talking with Edith, he is very cleverly trying to figure out where and when they are without actually saying where and when are we, which would give him away. So there's a very long 3-paragraph or 4-paragraph section on page 39, which goes into all the history, talking about York, Stamford Bridge, the 2 King Harolds, and then William the Conqueror being crowned in Westminster Abbey, where I was near 3 weeks ago on Christmas Day. The doctor considers it late summer. The night air was becoming slightly chilly. He needs a cloak for warmth. And, of course, September 10th is as late summer as it gets because autumn starts in about 10 days.
Yes. We are having a quite a cold summer this year. We've had a series of quite warm ones. It's very chilly. We are used to having a sort of fake autumn or fall, as you would call it. We have sort of like fool's autumn, which generally comes around here, and then it's a half tricked you. You're just having a week of colder weather, and then you have sort of second summer. But yeah, it's really chilly. Tonight I've actually got my fleece and my slippers on because it's getting quite autumny. So I would not want to be sleeping outside with just a cloak like Vicky and Stephen are on this.
I got a taste of that when I was in Dublin, and in Fahrenheit it was in the high 50s and cloudy and rainy almost every day that I was there, whereas in New York, late August is nuclear summer, usually in the 90s. We are in the last week of actual literal summer in New York. The summer ends hard on about September 17th. Before that, yes, the shadows are longer. It's a little colder in the shade, but in the sun, it's still 80 degrees today. And I was sitting outside for an hour at lunch because I'm working from home today. Gorgeous late summer day. But in a week, it is going to go from 80 to 55 overnight, and then it's going to be fall. We don't really get winter anymore in New York due to climate change. We used to get regular snowfalls like a snow globe. Now it pretty much stays in the 30s and 40s throughout the winter and doesn't really get below freezing anymore. But fall is still fall in New York, and we are getting to your weather very, very soon now.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the weather. Let's go back and talk about the Time Meddler. We've talked a little bit about how good Hartnell and Purvis and Maureen O'Brien are in the story. We have talked a little bit about Peter Butterworth. We've talked about Alethea Charlton. We've talked about these pseudo-historical elements. What else can we say about the Time Meddler and persuade folks to put it in their own Doctor Who Top 60 list?
Good question. I mean, I think, it is a pseudo-historical, but as we've just discussed there is a lot of education in there. I think, it's a good example of how you can hit that sort of educate and entertain brief at the same time. It's the way it's done as well is really clever, because it's not sort of like there's a lot of exposition, as that scene, but it's cleverly done. So you have that scene with the Doctor and Edith around the campfire where the Doctor is trying to figure out what year it is, and then Edith goes and gets him another cup of mead, and he goes and talks to the camera basically and puts it together. So I think that's a really a clever bit of writing to give a bit of education, and then the whole plot is around, like I say, this build up to the events that are so familiar to everyone. What did you think of the book?
I have a much longer audio essay than usual dedicated to the book.
Oh. The
interesting and unique circumstances under which I bought it. I did not buy this book when it came out in the 1980s for a very specific reason that I'll get into. I did acquire this book when I was in college, and that's a rambling anecdote unto itself. I read this book my freshman year of college, so I would have had a much deeper historical grounding by then, but it's one of the target books that I've read the fewest amount of times. What interested me is I hadn't watched the TV story in a few years when I started reading the book, and the Doctor, when he's waiting for Edith to come back with his refill of mead, starts talking about he really wishes that Barbara were here because it's a historical event she would have loved. I had thought that was Nigel Robinson's embellishment, and I was typing my audio essay notes as I go. I mentioned Nigel Robinson inserts a reference to Barbara. Then, after I finished the chapter, I went back to the episode transcript, Christie's online transcript, and I read all the scenes that take place in Chapter 3. Turns out Barbara is actually mentioned on screen by the Doctor, which is nice. Here's a trivia question for you. In how many stories is the name Barbara, referring to our Jacqueline Hill, uttered after the chase?
Ooh.
We saw her face on screen, obviously, in Resurrection of the Daleks, but how many times was she mentioned by name after Jacqueline Hill departed the series, never to return? Not counting, of course, Lexa and Meglos.
Right. As in just classic or?
Just classic.
Just classic. So, does she get a mention in the massacre?
She does. I went to the transcript of the massacre because I know the Doctor, when he gives his justly famous monologue, he says, "Not even my little Susan or Vicky." And as for Barbara and Chesterton, they were all too impatient to get back to their own time, and now Stephen. I don't think Barbara is mentioned by name again after the massacre, except I really can't hear this with my cheap set of ears. The intention in the Curse of Fenric, which, as we established, takes place near this story, would be the Doctor is supposed to mention the names of all of his companions in succession when he's trying to call up Faith to drive off the Hemivores. I watched the story several times before I learned that he's supposed to be saying the names of all of his companions in order. Ian, Barbara, Susan, Vicky, Stephen. I don't even know if it makes the subtitles because I haven't watched Fenric with subtitles in many, many years.
Yeah.
Have you watched Fenric recently, and can you hear the name Barbara on screen?
I haven't watched it recently, but I have watched that scene and tried to pick out who he's saying, but it's too muffled for my battered old ears as well. I can't pick out exactly what he's saying, but
Well, there's only one thing for it. We are going to quickly go to the fact machine.
Hold them! Hold them! I don't know that I can! You've got to faith!
Any more up there?
Only those creatures.
Quick, you men, down to the crypt.
Down.
Get the record books.
Right.
Hurry up!
That noise you were making, like singing, only it wasn't.
Just a little something to frighten off herbivores.
I thought vampires were scared of crucifixes.
No, it's not the crucifix that frightens them. It's the faith of the person carrying it. Creates a psychic barrier, just like I did.
Door's secure.
We're trapped.
Ace?
The mine shaft.
Correct.
Listen, I must go back to my man.
You can't go back that way. I mean, those creatures. They're inhuman.
I must try. If I fail, I fail. These two will stay with you.
Professor, show him how to make the singing.
I can't. Either he believes absolutely, or he doesn't.
I believe in the revolution.
Complete faith? No doubts?
Go. If we meet again, you will have your answer.
So the fact machine was unusually generous this week, and it actually gave me the audio from that particular scene in Curse of Fenric. And it's a little bit difficult because of Sylvester McCoy's diction when he talks fast, and it's a little bit different because of the incidental music. But whether or not your particular ears can make out the name Barbara in that scene, I'm also looking at the Chrissy Online transcript. Whoever typed the transcript up, I assume it's somebody named Chrissy, does not have the doctor as speaking in the scene. The written transcript says, you've got to have faith, faith. The doctor steps back into the middle of the room and concentrates. The hemovores enter from the church, then clutch their heads and scream. They all leave. So whoever typed this up didn't actually hear the names of any companions and didn't think to add it in as written dialogue. It's fascinating.
yeah. I wonder if
It's
there's
the most important part of Curse of Fenric, and you can barely make it out.
I wonder if there's a camera script available to see whether it's actually in there for Sylvester to.
I would ask the fact machine to give me the season 26 Blu-ray, which I have in the other room, and give me the script. Unfortunately, the fact machine only works once per episode, and you have to use it when it is most advantageous. I cannot use it again. So when the Curse of Fenric episode comes about, I urge my
We can
listeners
answer that question.
to get the answer to that question.
Or indeed, if anyone at home knows, email in to
Answers on a postcard to Doctor Who Literature, that's drwholiterature @gmail.com. So Frazer, this is normally the part of the episode where I play a game with my guest. And I was doing quizzes from the second Doctor Who quiz book by author of this book, Nigel Robinson. And then it turns out that Jim Sangster, when he was playing along, actually had the book in his hands and was reading the answers verbatim. So instead of using the second Doctor Who quiz book, we're going to use the third Doctor Who quiz book, which I purchased at McKay's in Chattanooga, Tennessee, one of America's great used bookstores. It also has a good line of pinnacles.
Because once we've done that, I've got a quiz for you. A game for you, even.
My goodness gracious. We are going to play Adventures in History, Section 1, page 13 of the third Doctor Who quiz book. And question 1, Who hid in a priest hole in 1643 and was released from there in 1984?
Good Lord. Who hid in a priest hole? Is it the guy from The Awakening? Will Chandler?
Yes, that's right. Exactly. Will Chandler. I used to have a betting pool. New York state law does not allow online betting. I had to take the betting pool down. I thought you would have had that much faster than you did, but yes, it is Will Chandler from The Awakening. Question 2. Name the 4 sons of Pa Clanton. How did each of them meet their deaths?
Um,
And don't give me the actual historical answer, because the historical answer is very, very different from the Doctor Who answer.
right. I'm going to feel a misery at this. There's an Ike Clanton.
Yes.
Mike Clanton.
No, there is no Mike Clanton.
I can't think of any others. Apart Ike. Billy Clanton.
Yes, Billy. Billy was the youngest. There's 2 other Clantons, one of whom is seen in the Gunfighters, and the other of whom is only mentioned but never seen.
What's a good cowboy name? Clint Clanton?
No, you're thinking of Clint Eastwood from Rawhide and Spaghetti Westerns and the Unforgiven. Clint Eastwood was not actually the name of one of the Clanton brothers, but was Michael J. Fox's name in Back to the Future Part 3.
It was. John?
No, I'm going to put you out of your misery. Phineas was the 3rd on-screen Clanton brother, and Reuben was the Clanton brother who died at Doc Holliday's hands before the episode began, Brother Reuben. If you are a high school student and you are listening to this episode to learn history before tomorrow's test on Monday, do not use the answers that I give you in this episode for your history quiz, because you will fail. The Gunfighters is a wonderful story, but is in no sense historically accurate. Don't use Uncle Jason for your answers. Question 3. Whose murdered body did the Doctor and Vicky discover on the road to Rome?
Oh, the singer dude. No, what was he called? Quintus?
He was not a singer. He was a lyre player.
Is it with the Q?
No, no Q.
It's something very Roman sounding.
It's a first name and a last name. The first name means great or large or utmost.
Maximus.
Yes.
Decimus Meridius.
Maximus Battalion, who had come to Rome to assassinate Nero. So far you have 2 out of 3. You have 1 right and 2 half rights. You need to get 3 out of 5, so take the next 2 very carefully. What were the circumstances which brought a peasant from the England of King John to the 20th century? This is a hard one, and I would have gotten it wrong. It is not Will Chandler. He was already the answer to question 1.
Peasant from whereabouts?
The England of King John.
England of King John to the 20th.
I will tell you that it is not a major character in an episode. It is a single scene, red herring subplot very early on in a longer Doctor Who story. The story is better known for featuring anachronistic beings that don't belong in London but are there anyway, causing a lot of havoc and destruction.
No, I'm stuck.
I thought my clue would have given it away. It is, in fact, the result of a minor aberration in Professor Whittaker's time scoop.
Oh, yes, in Invasion of the Dinosaurs, isn't it?
I believe episode 2. That is correct.
Yes.
So,
God.
question 5, you will fail this quiz and be one of the very few losers on Doctor Who Literature Games Night if you do not get question 5 correct. What was the Doctor's blue engine?
Blue engine?
Yes. I'll give you a hint. It's a pseudo-historical. I'll give you another hint. It's a in-color pseudo-historical.
It's the TARDIS.
Yes.
Yes.
It is the TARDIS. And for bonus points, which story?
Well, I would in-color pseudo-historical. When was that book written?
The third Doctor Who quiz book by Nigel Robinson was written and released in 1985.
85. I want to see the Time Warrior.
Close. It is actually the King's Demons.
King's Demons. There we go. Which
But you
we know
did
is great fun.
It is. King's Demons is also very underrated in my humble opinion. I had Stephen B. from New to Who as my guest for that episode, and that was just very, very enjoyable. In terms of, however, the top 241 DWM survey, King's Demons ranks at 228 out of 241. They thought it was one of Doctor Who's 15 worst stories, and I wholeheartedly disagree.
Yes. We've got some work to do on that one. Right, so I've thoroughly embarrassed myself with your quiz. Would you like to see how you do well with mine?
Hopefully a darn sight better, but go ahead. And I'm not playing the game's theme a second time because I only have license to use it once per episode, but you can imagine in your head Paddy Kingsland.
So we are going to play Guess the Cliffhanger. Because I know you haven't played this one in a while, but with a twist. With a twist. The twist is I have got the cliffhangers from the Target books, because this is a Target book, not podcast. So I'm going to read you out the cliffhanger from the novelization. And then you are going to tell me the story and the episode number.
I am very excited for this.
Okay.
And I apologize. It was Jim Sangster was my King's Demons guest. It was Stephen B. was the guest on Black Orchid, which is the identical twin, a 2-part novelization by Terence Dudley. My apologies to Jim.
Right. So we have got 5 cliffhangers for you to guess. So 10 points available, 1 for the story and 1 for the episode. Let's see how you get on. Hopefully you will do
what is passing? How many
passing
points
is going to be 7, I think.
7 out of 10. I can do that.
But I think you're going to do very well on these because, yeah, you'll see. So, are you ready?
I am ready.
Here we go then. Number 1. Liz was helping the controller at the newly established communications equipment when the Doctor returned to the capsule hangar. Recovery 7, do you read me? Any response yet? Asked the Doctor. Cornish shook his head. Nothing. I don't think there's much hope now. Then I suggest we cut it open, said the Brigadier. Cornish nodded, accepting the inevitable. I've got men with thermal lances standing by. Suddenly, there was a crackle from the speaker. I think I'm getting something, said Liz excitedly. Hello, Recovery 7, do you read me? Hello, Space Control. This is Recovery 7. Overjoyed, Cornish almost snatched the mic from Liz's hand. Hello, Recovery 7, this is Ralph Cornish. Charlie, you're back in Space Control. Open the capsule. We are not cleared for re-entry. Charlie, you're back in Space Control. What's wrong in there? Open the capsule. After a pause, Van Leiden's distorted voice came again. Hello, Space Control. This is Recovery 7. Will you clear us for re-entry, please? The Doctor took the mic from Cornish. Let me try. Hello, Van Leiden. What is the capital of Australia? We are not cleared for re-entry. How many beans make 5? We are not cleared for re-entry. The Doctor put down the mic and turned to Cornish. Right, cut it open.
You see, that's too easy because I was a champion of Ambassadors of Death before anybody else in the world was a champion of Ambassadors of Death. I had that in my top 10 in the early 90s on Rekart's Doctor Who to much ridicule. Not until Discontinuity Guide came out in 1995 did public opinion start to turn. I was ahead of the curve. Ambassadors of Death Part 2. Ambassadors is one of my favorite stories. That was episode 120 of this podcast with the great Kate Orman and John Blum as my guests. And that is episode 2.
Yes, you are 2 for 2. Well done. I told you you'd probably do well at this, didn't I? So, number 2. The flash of lightning from outside illuminated the decryption room as the Doctor and Ace burst through the door, followed by Soren. The Doctor looked in horror at what he saw. The body of Dr. Judson lay dead on the ground. Millington stood by the window, staring outwards. And Nurse Crane knelt by the body. She reached to move the body. "Don't touch him!" cried the Doctor. "Don't touch anything!" Nurse Crane looked up. "But he's an invalid. He can't even stand unless I help him." She didn't understand. The Doctor looked down at her pityingly. "He's dead," he said gently. "Now is the time." Millington turned slowly. In a flash of lightning, his face was filled with evil. "The chains of Fenric are shattered. The gods have lost the final battle. The dead man's ship has slipped its moorings, and the great ash tree itself trembles to its very roots." "We're too late," cried Ace. "Fenric's found a body. It's him." Millington swung round to stare at her. Then he turned to the body on the floor and whispered in horror, "Fenric!" The body moved. An evil strength filled the limbs that had been crippled for 20 years. The body of Dr. Judson slowly rose from the floor and stood before them. For a moment it didn't move, feeling its new strength, then it opened its eyes. They glowed red in the darkened room, seeking someone out. They found the Doctor. Fenric smiled. "You left me trapped in the shadow dimensions, trapped for 17 centuries. 17 centuries in which to prepare for this moment, and now I have a body again." The eyes burned with hatred. "We play the contest again, Time Lord."
There is an anecdote from the set of The Big Lebowski. The Coen brothers hire Sam Elliott for 2 days to play the story's narrator. He does the opening narration and appears on screen for 2 scenes. As Sam Elliott is delivering his closing monologue direct to camera, the Coen brothers made him sit there at the bowling alley and just recite it over and over and over and over and over again. Finally, Sam Elliott gets annoyed and says, "What the bleep is the matter? What do you want me to do?" And the Coen brothers turn to each other and smile, and at the same time say, "We nailed it on take 2. We just like watching you work." I had the answer to this within 6 words, but I just love hearing you narrate, so I let you go all the way through to the end. But this is a choice that you probably shouldn't have made, because you didn't know the fact machine was going to play us a clip from that story not 20 minutes ago. That is the cliffhanger to part 3 of The Curse of Fenric.
Or maybe I did. Okay.
Frazer Gregory is a production of The Fact Machine.
We play the game again, Fact Machine. Right, this one's a bit shorter, so let's see how you get on with this one. Number 3. The corridor went on and on for what seemed a very long time. Sorry, a very long way. Then suddenly it widened out into a kind of hall. The floor changed too. A complex pattern of glowing red and white tiles marked with strange symbols stretched across their path. Belial would have hurried across it, but the Doctor held him back. "Stay where you are."
See, that is a bit of a cheat. That was not supposed to be the cliffhanger to part 3 of Death to the Daleks, but because of episode overruns, they had to invent that cliffhanger in post-production from several minutes into what would have been part 4. So they did a crash zoom on the crazy tiled floor and threw the cliffhanger music over it. That is one of those cliffhangers that isn't. And it is not given a chapter ending by Terrence Dicks in the novelization of Death to the Daleks, as I recall. But that is the fake cliffhanger to part 3 of Death to the Daleks, season 11.
It is, yes. I had to dig that one out, because it is one of the more iconic cliffhangers of Doctor Who.
Entirely by accident, but yes, definitely iconic.
Okay, so you're doing super well so far. You are burying me with this quiz, so let's see if you can keep it up with number 4. A sharp click alerted Mel. She looked up. A wispy, iridescent net was floating down towards her. In reflex, she nipped aside. The net fluttered to the gravel in a scintillating display of sparks. Terrified, not understanding where the net came from or who had fired it, she dashed for freedom. And, inadvertently emulating the hapless Sarn, she bundled into a tripwire. Her shin triggered the trap. In a whoosh of dust and shale, a huge opaque bubble with a bulging metal detonator encapsulated the screaming girl. Steam spurted from its underside. Mel frantically taut the plastic. To no avail. The bubble began to spin. Faster and faster. Towards the edge of a cliff. Mel kicked. She yelled. Tried to pierce the bubble with her fingernails. Attempted, by running counterclockwise, to force it away from the precipice. All in vain. The bubble rolled inexorably on, until, abandoning terra firma, it shot over the edge of the cliff.
See, I am reading that book as we speak, and I am recording that episode 4 days from now, although it's not going to come out for 2 weeks as you're sitting there listening to this on Sunday morning. Or if you're Conrad, Sunday evening in the bathtub. Hello, Conrad. That is the infamous Part 1 cliffhanger to Time and the Ronnie.
Yes, it is.
One of the cliffhangers that nearly broke my young fandom when I saw it in 1988.
Yes, I thought, nice little segue into your next episode for you. I'm carefully planning these.
All right, I've
Last
already
one
won
then.
the quiz. I'm 8 for 8.
You
I've already
8 for
passed,
8.
but let me go for perfect high score, 10 for 10.
Yeah, 10 for 10, 100%. Let's see if we can get this one. Slowly, Jamie got to his feet. I reckon we ought to be back to Zoe now, Doctor, he suggested nervously. She'll be worried. But the Doctor had already begun to creep forward towards the awesome machine gleaming menacingly against the cliff. You're not thinking what you're thinking, are you, Doctor? Jamie whispered, clutching his sleeve. Most definitely. The Doctor grinned, still staring in fascination at the open hatchway. Och, no, Jamie pleaded, frowning at the hundreds of track marks crisscrossing the hollow in front of the ominously looming saucer. Can you not keep out of trouble just for once? He finally reached the curved hatchway, and the Doctor stopped to admire the underside of the gigantic craft spread out above them. How absolutely splendid, he murmured, almost reverentially. Yes, obviously an interstellar craft of quite sophisticated design. No doubt powered by some kind of... The Doctor paused as his arm was gripped painfully. Don't do that, Jamie, he protested. Jamie's gasp of horror made the Doctor jerk round. His jaw dropped open and his eyes widened in surprise and dismay. Oh dear, Jamie. Oh dear. Oh my goodness, he muttered, making Jamie wince as he gripped his arm in turn. 2 quarks were standing a few meters away, cutting off their escape. The Doctor and Jamie stared at the squat, buzzing robots for a moment and then turned back in futile desperation towards the hatchway. The opening was filled by Toba's huge gaunt figure. His massive gloves creaked as he opened his hands in a gesture of ironic welcome on the threshold of the spacecraft. Do not move! Do not move! Bleated the quarks in a kind of crazed falsetto. You've got to get this one.
I should have known that you were going to besmirch my show with the cliffhanger to episode 1 of The Dominators.
Yay! I do apologise to any Scottish listeners out there for my attempt at Jamie's accent, which was terrible.
I was a bit thrown because when you said gleaming, that is the word that appears in every Terrence Dicks book. So I thought for a moment that it might be the Crotons, but that doesn't match any cliffhanger in the Crotons that I can recall. But of course, once you get to Quarks and Toba and the fact that it's Frazer, the foremost apologist for the Dominators, it was a foregone conclusion that the Dominators was going to show up at some point in this quiz, and sure enough, it did.
It did. So it's trickier with the target book because when you're doing like the audio, or watching the counties, you've got to recognise them. But with the book, is obviously it's given names and whatnot. So I was thinking, am I going to have to edit some of these just to make it a bit more interesting and difficult for you? But you've done super well. Well done, you.
Well, Frazer, we have gone a little bit over time. As always, this has been a blast to record with you. This is your 8th and hopefully not your final appearance on Doctor Who Literature. Where else can we find you online in the coming weeks?
You can find me on Twitter, the remnants of Twitter, at Felix Frazer, all one word, Frazer with a Z, just like Mr. Hines. You will find me on the Track One podcast quite a bit recently, and I think I've got a few more to record as well coming up. And a variety of other podcasts out there. Basically, I have a microphone, and whoever will let me use it on their podcast, I will.
All right, Frazer, always a pleasure. I will see you next time.
Thanks, everyone, and keep turning those pages.
It's keep turning the pages. Doctor Who, The Time Meddler, by Nigel Robinson, televised as The Time Meddler, teleplay by Dennis Spooner, televised in July 1965, paperback release date March 17, 1988, target book number 126, cover artist Jeff Cummins. When the TARDIS materializes on an apparently deserted Northumbrian beach, Stephen disputes the Doctor's claim that they have traveled back to the 11th century. The discovery of a modern wristwatch in a nearby forest merely reinforces his opinion. But it is 1066, the most important date in English history, and the Doctor's arrival has not gone unnoticed. Observing the appearance of the TARDIS is a mysterious monk who recognizes the time machine for what it is. He also knows that the Doctor poses a serious threat to his master plan, a plan which, if successful, could alter the future of the entire world. Most of the last several Target cover paintings before the novelization of The Time Meddler came out were by Tony Mazzaro and were fabulously realistic pieces of work. And then came the book we discussed last week in episode 124, Terror of the Vervoids, that basically represented the end of Mazzaro's residency as Target's in-house cover painter, and earned me a stern talking to at home. Mazzaro only has one Doctor Who cover painting left, and it ain't this one. The Time Meddler cover is truly a thing of beauty. It's not my all-time favorite. I think that still remains Mazzaro's debut cover, The Seeds of Death, but this cover by Jeff Cummins truly is amazing. Deep purpley sky, enlivened by a low sun, reflecting on the water in shades of pink and orange and fiery yellow, and there are Viking ships, and you can see the monastery and the beacon fires and the glint of the monk's anachronistic wristwatch, but not busy, not cluttered. Peter Butterworth in his cowl is front and center, half lit by the beacon fires, and the other half in shadow, backlit by the sun. A detail from the cover photo can be seen as the episode thumbnail in your podcast app this week, but that doesn't do it justice. Buy this book cover for yourselves. The paperback edition of Time Meddler comes out in March 1988. That was an important moment for me as a fan. The month that Time and the Ronnie first aired on my local PBS station, Channel 21, Garden City, Long Island, New York, as a Saturday night special before Channel 21 even aired Season 23, let alone the remaining stories from Season 24 after Time and the Ronnie. As I said to Michael Storm over text recently, Time and the Ronnie was the first of 3 breaking points in my Doctor Who fandom, moments where the product was so appallingly bad that I nearly renounced the show forever, and lamented all the time and cash that I'd spent on it to date. Michael, one of the more perceptive people out there, responded, "Does that include Space Babies?" He's right. Make that 4 breaking points. The second breaking point was the VHS of Downtime, and the third, well, when we get to the final book in the Target release schedule, you'll learn more about that. So, when Time Meddler hit bookstore shelves in the US, probably very soon after that March 1988 airing of Mark and the Ronnie, I didn't buy it. Now my break in fandom was a blip. I bought all of the other books that came out afterwards, but for whatever reason, never went back for Time Meddler. Not until November 1991. By then I was a freshman in college. One Saturday morning, 4 of us walked from our Baltimore campus to a used sci-fi fantasy bookstore called Tales from the White Hart, sadly no longer in business. There was me, that is Jason, and my 3 droogs, that is Richard, Mark, and Miller. Richard was also a Doctor Who fan via PBS, in his case from New England, and he's the guy that introduced me to the New Adventures later that same month. Miller, I didn't know very well, never hung out with him again. It's very easy to make friends freshman year of college, but it's not as easy to keep them. Mark died of heart failure in 2017 after making a substantial name for himself as a political reporter in his adoptive state of North Carolina. Richard and Miller had just seen Highlander 2 the night before and spent most of the walk to the bookstore shouting at each other, "They're aliens! From the planet Zeist!" They were having the same crisis of faith in the Highlander franchise that I had once had in Doctor Who. At the bookstore, the other three fellows bought vintage sci-fi paperbacks with lurid covers and got individual praise from the owner who was working the register. I bought the novelization of this and the novelization of Battlefield, which, come to think of it, would have just come out, so clearly the owner knew something about Doctor Who. But she only gave me a dirty look, as if to say, "You come all the way to my store and this is what you buy?" I would have read this book back at the dorm, over the confused looks of my roommate Nelson, a Long Islander like me but not a Doctor Who fan. Nelson and I had a toxic relationship and did not room together after freshman year, so it's funny now that of all the other friends mentioned in this essay, he's the one that I'm still closest to. As you will have gleaned from my conversation with Frazer, I love the Time Meddler on TV. So it's an odd fact of timing, and the various eddies and waterfalls of life as we live it, that the book has such a minuscule place in my fandom. What I'm not going to do is a line-by-line reading of the prose of the Time Meddler novelization. This is our second Nigel Robinson book, following The Censorites, episode 117 of this podcast. We know that he is an adept writer, not prone to purple prose or impossible run-on sentences, and this is one of the few target writers to graduate to the New Adventures. What I'll do instead is discuss how Robinson changes and embellishes the TV, far more than he did for The Censorites, although not quite to the extent that he will for his next novelization after this one, The Underwater Menace. The prologue reenacts the end of the preceding TV serial, The Chase, which had not been novelized yet, and would not be for another 16 months in the paperback market. This shows the moment from the Planet of Decision, not televised, where Stephen, known only in the prologue as the, quote, young man in the astronaut's uniform, discovers and enters the TARDIS on the planet Mechanus. One can imagine an alternate timeline in which Stephen enters the Daleks' abandoned time machine by accident, and is killed half an hour later when the Doctor blows it up without realizing he's aboard. The word Daleks does not appear in this prologue, although mechanoids does. The former are referred to only as the, quote, strange alien creatures who had come to this planet in search of 4 mysterious space travelers. Presumably confusing to anyone who'd bought this book without being familiar with The Chase first, but most useful to those reading the books in story order, I guess. Chapter 1 applies some subtle continuity fixes, including Stephen saying he saw 2 boxes in the jungle and not just 1, and Vicky explaining how Ian and Barbara got home, with Stephen on TV never having asked where they went. John Peel will apply a similar fix to Ben and Polly's absence when the eventual Evil of the Daleks novelization comes out several years later. The Doctor adds a sarcastic comment to Stephen about perhaps having heard of the planet on which the TARDIS has landed, Earth. Chapter 2 is called The Saxons. Robinson tells us that Edith married Wolnoth when she was 15, and that all the Saxons are short, just over 5 feet. This has the ring of historical accuracy, though the production demands of this show don't enable me to do the level of research that can prove or disprove that line. Robinson lightly mocks some of Spooner's dialogue for Edith as, quote, the classic line of the beleaguered housewife. Robinson makes more of the conflict and tension between the Doctor and Stephen, belying the Hepburn and Tracy, or Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert, level of chemistry that William Hartnell and Peter Purves had on the screen. Page 28 adheres to the scripts, and thus omits Hartnell's delightful found poetry dialogue fluff and instant recovery of the mountain goat line.
Now I suggest we take a walk along the beach and try and find a spot where the cliffs run down to sea level.
Yeah, but that could be miles. It'd be much quicker to go up here.
Yes, so possibly it might, but I'm not a mountain goat, and I prefer walking to any day, and I hate climbing.
Also missing is Stephen reciting along with Vicky Her complaint about heights that we heard a week ago in TV Time and the Chase. In the book, Vicky says the line alone. Robinson plays up the monk's comedy value right away. Page 30, the monk thinks to himself that he's, quote, extraordinarily clever, and would deal with the situation in his usual magnificent and stylish fashion, which is exactly the prose description of Peter Butterworth's marvelous delivery of the monk's lines. Sorry, can you tell that I love this story? The word capacious appears on page 33, and I now regret at book number 126 having not kept track of what percentage of the books have used that word to date. Jim Sangster, I assume you have, so let me know. Thanks. Robinson in chapter 3 uses his storytelling power to add Halley's Comet to the story, as Edith recalls its appearance as a, quote, mysterious omen of even darker things to come. Robinson also points out that Stephen's rugby tackle of a Saxon villager works because tackles haven't been invented yet, and Vicky notes that a Saxon astronaut wrestling match is not exactly a fair fight. LOL. At the cliffhanger to episode 1, end of chapter 3, Robinson adds a moment of recognition between the Doctor and the monk, and seemingly gives us the famous Underwater Menace episode 3 cliffhanger line shortly before he himself novelizes that story, quote, he had the Doctor in his power. Nothing in the world could interfere with his plans now. Chapter 4, Robinson describes the meal that the monk prepares for the absent Doctor. Episode 2 was Hartnell's second vacation week in 3 serials, following Episode 3 of the Space Museum, as cholesterol loaded. The monk is an overtly slapstick figure both here and throughout the book, falling down a hill while scurrying to greet Edith. Vicky recalls the absent Barbara and adopts a, quote, schoolmarm tone while being interrogated by the Saxon villagers. And Frazer reminded me by text, after we recorded, that Barbara, after the massacre but before Curse of Fenric, is also mentioned by the Doctor in Planet of the Daleks. Thanks, Frazer. Chapter 5 involves the rape of Edith, unthinkable brutality against a female character. This is strongly implied on TV, even if the act is not shown and the word is never uttered. But Robinson makes it clear in the book with the mad, lustful gleam in the eyes of the Vikings on page 67, and he will come back to this later. Elsewhere, he steps back to imagine what it's like to live in this world. Vicky on page 60, enjoying the fresh sea breeze and tang of the salt air, as a girl from the 25th century let loose in the cleaner and more natural 11th. Chapter 6 ups the violence quotient in the Saxon-Viking fight, Eldred here breaking his collarbone rather than just sustaining a cut on his arm, and Robinson describes the wound as, page 71, quote, a stomach-turning mess of open flesh, broken bone, and blood. Ew. Chapter 7 is 20 pages long. Hoo boy, that's a big one. Yes, it is rather big, isn't it, Jamie? In the first scene alone, Stephen gets an anachronistic, for a book based on a 1965 story, line about a secret passage in a monastery cell being as cliched as, quote, escaping through the ventilation shaft. Doctor Who hadn't used that latter trope yet by 1965. The monk takes an extra comedy pratfall when he finds the Doctor's gone missing from his cell. The episode 3 Viking argument, one is a warrior, the other is a coward, is enlivened by Robinson's perspective, page 87 into 88, quote, Sven was many things, a harsh warrior, a brutal killer, a violator of women, but he was not a traitor to his king. When the monk laments his lack of privacy at the monastery, Robinson gives him a colorful extra line, page 90, quote, what do they think this is, the Park Lane Hilton? Chapter 8, Robinson includes Vicky describing to Stephen her tragic backstory. In publication order, it hasn't been long since The Rescue came out, so this would not have been new information to the reader of 1988. In story order, though, it's been several books since you first met Vicky, so the reminder is helpful. Plus, on TV, Stephen never learned of Vicky's backstory, so this helps fill a minor hole. On page 104, the monk whistles a song by the Beatles. That didn't happen on TV, though the TV story before this did feature video of a Beatles performance, unless you own the US edition of the Season 2 Blu-ray collection, in which case it doesn't. And even if it did happen on TV in the Time Meddler, you wouldn't have heard it on the Blu-ray, especially if you own the US edition. Also of note in this chapter is the Doctor knocking a Viking unconscious with a blow to the head. I believe in story order, this is the last of many, many times that the Hartnell Doctor uses comedy violence to overcome a minor adversary. If you're wondering why it doesn't happen in Season 3, well, check back to any of my Season 3 book episodes, especially those featuring Jim Sangster and Ian Potter as guests, as we discuss the sad fate of what happens to Hartnell under the John Wiles Donald Tosh regime. Chapter 9 is titled The Monk's Master Plan, a reference to the soon-to-be forthcoming, in both story and publication order, 13-episode Dalek epic, not to mention a pre-reference to the line from Doctor Who's final 2022 TV episode, The Master's Dalek Plan. Robinson invents a new line of dialogue for the Doctor, in keeping with that story, page 109, quote, "Heaven knows what would have happened if you'd have been let loose on the Great Pyramids." Stay tuned for that adventure in a forthcoming episode of Doctor Who Literature. One of the big selling points of the TV serial is the atomic chemistry between Hartnell and Butterworth. I can't play the entire story for you, but I can play one scene.
Well, here we are. That's my time ship. Oh, so that's it, eh? This horrible block of stone. This horrible block of stone, as you call it, is a perfect Saxon sarcophagus. A Saxon what? Sarcophagus. Yes, quite so. And more in keeping with the period, I would say, than a modern police box. What's the matter, Doctor? Can't you repair your camouflage? Now. Don't try and bamboozle me. It so happens that your machine fits into this monastery, but it's sheer luck. Luck? Luck? Oh, no, there's no luck about it. I couldn't have picked a better place for my headquarters than this. A deserted monastery right on the coast. Gullible peasants who believe everything I say to them. No, Doctor. No, I plan to materialize my ship on this very spot, disguised as a sarcophagus, and here it is.
I see, and all this is part of your master plan,
Precisely. There's nothing hit or miss about my machine.
No, isn't there now? Well, let's have a look at this great wonder, Yes, well, tell me, how does one exactly get into this sarcophagus, Hammer and chisel?
This way, Doctor. Oh, mind your head.
Note, by the way, that for the book, Robinson upgrades the line to the 1988 period-appropriate chameleon circuit rather than camouflage unit, and also mentions that the monk's TARDIS, a later model than the Doctor's, has its scanner screen hidden by white shutters, as we'd later see on Doctor Who in about a decade's time in TV years. Chapter 10 features a debate between Wolnoth and Edith on the one hand, trying to raise an army of villagers to defeat the monk, whom they correctly believe to be inviting the Viking fleet to land, and Eric, who plays the voice of skepticism. How can the monk be evil? He's a monk. This is interesting. It's also fully invented for the book, Robinson's way of spicing up a scene that could have been just dull exposition. Like how the Coen brothers wrote the character of Knox Harrington, the video artist, into The Big Lebowski, a single-scene role played so well by David Thewlis that Thewlis later got invited back to play the big bad in Season 3 of Fargo. Although Eric isn't that good. Also strongly embellished in the same scene is the Doctor and Stephen and Vicky, momentarily captives in the monastery, wondering what'll happen if the monk gets his way. The book goes much deeper into it, explaining exactly how history will change and how Vicky and Stephen, assuming they have any distant Norman ancestry, might immediately cease to exist. The Doctor says, page 125, quote, "Everything in the universe is dependent on everything else. To alter even the smallest thing is like dropping pebbles in a pond. The ripples spread outwards in ever-increasing circles, affecting everything in its turn." Now this is almost exactly what Ben Aronovich has the Seventh Doctor say in Part 2 of Remembrance of the Daleks, except that wasn't written or aired at the time this book was written and published. More fixes, there's a lot in this chapter. The Doctor has Vicky and Stephen clear the monastery of all the monks' anachronisms, and the Vikings' violent death at the hand of the Saxons is announced by Wolnoth, page 130, as explicit revenge for Edith's rape. Chapter 11 is mostly invented, explaining the final fate of all the monks' 20th century comforts, shrunken in his TARDIS console room along with everything else. Vicky, parroting along the Doctor's line about history taking its natural course, must have been a Maureen O'Brien ad-lib in rehearsal, as in the book the line belongs solely to the Doctor. Edith, who by the way in the book is said to have second sight, also makes a final appearance to close out this chapter in a way that didn't happen on TV, Robinson having decided that she is our audience identification figure. Unique to the book is a charming epilogue, which details the monk having extra misadventures in 1066, trying and failing to make his way to the Battle of Hastings in a last-ditch effort to help King Harold Godwinson retain his crown and thwart William the Conqueror. As such, the monk's final scene in the monastery, which otherwise plays out exactly as it did on TV, takes place 3 months later, over Christmas, after the villagers have forgotten about him. But Robinson, clever as he is, gives the monk a backup plan for whenever he gets his TARDIS functioning again. He'll travel back to ancient Egypt and assist with the building of the Great Pyramid. And we're going to join the monk on that excursion. But, sadly, not until target book number 142, which is about 4 or 5 months away in the life of this podcast, for those of you listening in real time to my Sunday morning releases. We hope you'll stick around and join us then. Next time on Doctor Who Literature, we are going back to our Trial of a Time Lord mini-season, which again is non-consecutive and out of order. One of my longest running guests is going to be rejoining me as we take a look at the last Terrance Dicks novelization in story order, anyway, not in publication order, and it is his last chance to novelize a story by the great Robert Holmes. It is a story that you know as The Trial of a Time Lord Parts 1, 2, 3, and 4, but which, for the target books, is given the much more interesting name of Doctor Who, The Mysterious Planet. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Doctor Who Literature. The executive producer is David Barsky. This episode was produced by Jim Sangster and yours truly. This week's episode was written and edited by me. A special thanks to my special guest, Frazer Gregory. This podcast can be found on most of your podcast apps of choice. You can find all past episodes at podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/Doctor Who Lit. It really helps if you rate 5 stars and subscribe. You can find me on Blue Sky and YouTube at Doctor Who Novels, that's Dr. Who Novels, and on email at Doctor Who Literature, that's drwholiterature@gmail.com. Please drop me a line with your comments, questions, and suggestions. Thank you for listening, and whatever you do, keep turning the pages.
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.